Hi, I'm Patricia, and this is Buzz and Bark Animals Welcome. And today I'm actually going to do something different. I normally do Reiki and sound healing, and I'm an animal communicator as well. And so I'm going to talk about three types of animal communication and what you can expect from them and how they are different and what they share in common and where I think animal communication is going in the future. Okay, but before I do that, remember to like, share, and you can leave a comment and subscribe. Would be really great. And I have one of my Native American style flutes with me. It is for the key of, I think it's F sharp, or maybe it's F. And it is for the heart chakra, and look how big it is. So it takes a lot of air to play this flute, so I don't play it often. And it's made out of cedar, and I believe the wood comes from Washington State, which is where I am. So I'm going to try to play it. I am having seasonal allergies, so we'll see how far I can get with it. And then because Earth Day is this month, it's in April, I think it's around the 22nd, the 20th, 22nd, around that time. I have some of my earthy stones. Like this is septarian, and septarian is actually made out of ancient fossilized algae. And the first one I got was a little one, and then I ended up buying this bigger one. And it is really beautiful energy. It's very loving. It's what you think of when you think of Gaia. It's very connected. And then I have the mahogany obsidian, the one that I can't remember the name of in one of my videos. And this has the qualities of obsidian. Obsidian is a black stone, usually. It comes from the volcanoes of, I believe, Hawaii, or it's volcanic. And there are many types of obsidian. There's even a really beautiful blue one. It looks like glass. And mainly it's a protective stone, but this one in particular is for, I believe, the root and the sacral chakra. This has a lot of unconditional love in it, to help us develop unconditional love for ourselves. Very tender stone, but also very strong and very powerful, and I connect it to even Archangel Michael. And then this one is a rhodonite, and so this one can be, I can use it for the root with that black, the black brownish color in there, and also the pink of the heart. It's another unconditional love, self-love stone. And all of these three together are very powerful, and they're going to be here with me as I give the talk today. And I won't be doing any sound healing, but what I will do is I'll play the singing bowl and the flute as just, to get us into the mood. I might do some light language or yoik or something. We'll see. So let's get into the topic, which is this animal communication and the different types of animal communication. And even within the realm of animal communication, there are specialties. So the specialties can be the horse whisperer, right? And they may not actually communicate with any other animal. They have the ability to do it, but they'll focus on horses And you'll see some of them even in the equine therapy, where there'll be an animal communicators, and they'll go and they'll communicate with the horses that will work with people with, addictions, different types of disabilities, or maybe to help somebody with autism come out more. And so you'll have the horse whisperers who will come in and work with those horses. They may not necessarily work with the patients, the clients that come in, but they'll work with the horses. Or they'll go to a sanctuary where horses are experiencing trauma, or they came out of a trauma situation. And so you get a lot of, the horse whisperer, and they'll also help with horses that are having problems with performance. So they may be, equestrian events and things like that, or maybe a racehorse, or, a horse that's having some kind of emotional or mental blocks. And so the horse whisperer will come in and help with that. But mostly what we've heard of is the animal communicator and the pet psychic, and they're not the same thing. And I made a video on this for my last Buzz and Bark animals, which I'm not going to post. I'm just going to redo the topic. And the difference between an animal communicator and a pet psychic, they are kind of interchangeable. So the pet psychic doesn't need to be in the space with the animal, and they act just like a psychic would. So, when you go to a card reader, and they may even use different divination. So when you go to a card reader or a psychic and you ask them questions and they read your energy field, and they don't talk to you, they may not talk to you directly, like you may even get a reading where they send it to you and you're not even involved in the reading. Like all you do is send them a question and maybe your picture or something, and then a psychic will send you, a report or something based on you. So a pet psychic can do this over the phone. They can make an MP3. They usually just need maybe a picture of the animal, and they're not talking to the animal directly. What they're doing is they're getting images, they're getting feelings, they're getting sensations, but they're detached from the animal and they're more of an observer. So they're not having a conversation with the animal. And they can do a lot of the same things that an animal communicator can do, but they're doing it more in a detached way. So the person who has the animal, the guardian of the animal, will ask, well, my dog has behavioral issues and I don't know why. So then the psychic will tune into that, and they'll see past things that happened, or they'll see maybe something of like a remedy or some kind of reason for why the animal is, the dog is behaving in the way that the dog is behaving, but they don't have a conversation with the animal. And the other one is the animal communicator. The animal communicator doesn't actually need to be present with the animal, but they're still having a conversation with the animal. So I do remote animal communication. I don't really do the pet psychic so much, although I have done a little of it, but mainly I'm an animal communicator and I use a lot of shamanic tools, which is the third one I'm going to get into in a minute. And so the animal communicator can use a photograph or maybe a video clip, or they directly talk to the animal. So they could do it as a Zoom call, they can do it as an MP3, they can do it as a phone call. So the animal could actually be present in the space when the phone call is happening. So they're obviously not talking to the animal on the phone, but they're using the same so they're using telepathy. The psychic isn't necessarily using telepathy because the psychic isn't talking directly to the animal. They're not having a conversation with the animal. That's the difference between the psychic and the communicator. Although you'll hear the words being interchanged because there's a misunderstanding of what a psychic does and what a communicator does. And some animal communicators are both psychic and animal communicators. But the animal communication itself is done through telepathy. And you can go and look at some of the most famous animal communicators. They don't call themselves necessarily pet psychics. And the word pet psychic will sometimes be used to draw people in. So if somebody's making a YouTube video and they're an animal communicator and they want to get more SEO, more traffic to their channel, they may interchange and use the word pet psychic because people hear the word psychic and they understand that, whereas the animal communicator is less known. So if you were trying to popularize your video or get more people to your video, then you would use Pet Psychic. But Pet Psychic and Animal Communicator are not the same thing. So an animal communicator uses telepathy, and that's what they rely on. They're not necessarily using intuition so much. They're not using psychic abilities in the traditional sense, but they use their clairsenses. So an animal communicator can see visually. So they get movies, and the way they're communicating with the animal telepathically is by seeing movies. Or they could feel sensations in their bodies. This is more complicated though, that aren't their own sensations. So if you're going to be an animal communicator where you're working through sensations, like feelings in the animal's body, then you have to know what your ground zero is. If you have a tendency to get headaches, you may accidentally, say, well, your dog has a headache or your cat has a headache, but it's actually your own headache. So you have to know where your base level is physically. If you're one of those people that has, like me, I have MCAS, so I get all kinds of weird stuff to my body all the time. So I can't really rely on the sensation so much unless I'm very grounded and I know what my ground zero is. So I have to work harder at that one. So for me, the movies works. And I can get colors. So animals can send me a color. Or they can send me words. So I can get, because what they're sending is a frequency, and then my body and my brain is interpreting that frequency as a conversation. So animals do not speak in a language. They don't speak French, English, German, or whatever the language is. What they do is they send us images, and they send us frequencies, and they send us, again, for some people, feelings and sensations, or audio. So people could hear something. Like they'll hear something whispered to them, or they'll hear something in their mind, right? Like words in their mind, or again, the visuals. And so the animal communicator is working really quick. The brains are interpreting things very fast, like with microseconds or whatever you would say. It's like boom, 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 boom. And so there is margin for error, because sometimes there is an image that will come through that is extremely confusing. And I get that a lot. And so that's when you really need the animal guardian to have a conversation with them. You need to ask them questions like, okay, I am seeing a red couch. I don't know. I'm seeing a close-up of a cushion of a red couch, and I'm not sure what this means. Can you please let me know what that means? Do you have a red couch? Because if they don't have a red couch, and that red couch has another symbolic meaning. And so it's really easy to get confused, especially when an animal communicator is learning the thing. And the other one is symbolism. So animals can send metaphors and symbolism, or they can send past events, and it gets confusing with the present moment. So they could be showing images of, say, they've been in 3 households and they've been adopted twice, right? And they've been through the thing, or maybe they had a home and then they went into foster care and then they got another home, right? And so any of those places where they live, they could be showing an image, and it may not be an image of their current household. And so when an animal communicator seems like they're being wrong, I'm sorry, we don't have that in our house, that could also mean that it comes from another household they've been, right? And sometimes animals will talk about previous lifetimes. And that gets even more confusing. And that's really, really deep animal communication. And they'll say, I was a cat in another life with the person that I am now, and I'm a dog, right? So sometimes there's the reincarnation stories that come up, and the people will ask those questions like, is my cat my former dog, right? Because there'll be certain traits certain behaviors that would have been in the cat that were in the dog, and then there's a familiar feeling. So somebody could be, so they lose a dog and they're grieving, and then they start having images of a particular cat. And then they get this intuition to go to an animal shelter, and then they see a cat, and then there's just this really overpowering feeling of, I know you, right? Just like with humans, like when you have a deja vu, or you meet somebody and they feel so familiar to you, sometimes it's a narcissist, but a lot of the times it's not. It's just, the souls had been in a previous form together. And so there's that feeling with pets as well. And then the other question, especially spiritual people will ask, is this animal a soulmate, right? And there'll be signs and there'll be omens and there'll be metaphors that will point to that it being that, right? But usually you can just tune into it if you're an animal communicator or even a pet psychic, and you can feel like that first answer that comes up, a yes or a no. Reminds me of the monks when they ask a question and they go yes or no, And so you can ask them yes or no questions, and then you get like a quick yes. But then the mind will come in and start rationalizing that, oh, you're just making that up or whatever. And so that's one of the traps that animal communicators will fall into, as any intuitive or any psychic. And you got to go with that first answer, because what will happen is the illogical brain's going to kick in, and then it's going to have doubts, and it's going to say, oh no, that's not true. And then you're going to get all confused and disoriented, and then you've lost the thread. So with animal communication, the answers come really quick, and you'll see animal communicators speaking really fast, because it is a type of channeling too. It's like a telepathic channeling, but it's not with a human, it's with an animal. And one of the other traps is, because there's a lot of information on animal behavior now, and there's animal behavior research, which I find fascinating, but it can interfere with animal communication, because we will look at the body language of an animal and try to interpret it from a more logical, scientific way, and then we completely miss the thread of what that animal is trying to communicate. Because on the surface, the animal behavior research and things, it all makes sense on like the surface behavior, but when you go deeper into an animal's soul, that behavior might not mean what it would mean scientifically. It could be leading to something else. It could be leading to another conversation. So just because an animal does a play pose, just because a dog does a play pose, doesn't necessarily mean that the dog wants to play. They may be trying to get my mind and do like a playful thing, and then the conversation will begin. But it doesn't necessarily mean the dog wants to go play fetch or that sort of thing. But on a superficial level, yes, that is what the dog wants. But then when you go deeper, it's like when you first meet somebody, you have kind of a surfacey kind of conversation, and then once you get to know somebody, they become more vulnerable and they share more deeper information. Well, with an animal, it's sort of the same thing. So a lot of the times you'll hear an animal communicator when they're tuning into the animal. I mean, I do this as well, is we'll say, okay, your dog is sniffing my leg, and now they're looking into my face. And because we're visualizing as if we're in the same space, we're actually doubling ourselves in a way. Our spirit is going into that space where that animal is. So I could be in Washington State and I could be talking to an animal in France, right? And so there's a part of me that is in that room with that animal, and I may not even be consciously aware of that. And so in my mind, I'm seeing a movie of like me in that space with that animal and what that animal's behavior is, as if it's meeting me physically, but obviously I'm in another place. So this is kind of where animal communication is going. It's going into this Aquarius age that we're in, and we're working more with frequencies, which is Aquarius. We're also sending our astral bodies into these spaces where these animals are at. And the animals have a sense that we're there physically with them, even though we're not. So I was watching a video of the animal communicator, Danielle, what's her name? McKinnon. I think it's McKinnon. And I actually interviewed her a long time ago for an article. Anyways, when she was doing a Zoom call on a podcast, and she was talking to the dog. It was a Labrador, a white lab named Becky. And when she was done with the conversation, the dog actually went to the window as if the dog was saying goodbye to her. And I thought, well, that's odd. And then I realized that the dog actually thought that the communicator was physically in that space with them, because subconsciously, or maybe not to our awareness, we're actually doubling ourselves. And the humans that were doing the podcast, they didn't get a sense that, she was in that presence, but the animal did. Because that's the relationship that we actually have with these non-humans, is that they don't have those restrictions on their mind saying, oh, telepathy is impossible, oh, doubling is impossible. They live in another world. And so this brings me to shamanism. So how does shamanism fit into animal communication? Well, I took a couple animal communication classes, and I just wasn't getting anywhere with it. I'm like, okay, this, I didn't like the instructor. It was online. I didn't like the instructor, and I learned what I could, but it just wasn't deep enough for me. So then there was another instructor who was in Ireland, and she taught shamanic animal communication, or shamanic, it was interspecies communication. And she had this one meditation where we were in the environment that the animal would be in, right? So we're hearing the birds singing, we're feeling the wind, we're getting a sense of whatever that animal is feeling in that environment. And then from that, we meld with the spirit of the animal. And so this is a lot different than animal communication. And then it's a spirit to spirit conversation, but it's taking in, she had us work with our senses. So what are you hearing? What are you feeling on your skin? What is this world that this animal is in? Now, she didn't necessarily do these remotely. She would be at what kind of animal? Donkeys. Yeah, her whole thing was donkeys. And so she was at a donkey sanctuary, and she would actually go out where the donkeys were, and then she would communicate with them. But when she was in their space, she was, paying attention to the wind and the bird sounds and the rustling of leaves and everything that animal would be experiencing. But we don't have the same sensory as them, so we can't experience, the environment the same way a donkey would, right? We're not four-legged. We're not, we don't have the same senses that they have. But the proximity of that, right? Okay, so the animal is in this environment, and I'm going to meld into all that is, right? I'm going to unify myself. I'm going to become this unified field. And so it was very much quantum physics and shamanism. And I feel like this is where animal communication is heading. So right now, there's a lot of mundane animal communication, which is perfect for the 3D world that, that we're living in. But now we're moving into these higher realms, and as we move into these higher realms, we're going to rely more on shamanism. Now, ancient shamans could shapeshift, and there's probably some that still can do it. And there's the ones from South America, and I think parts of Central America, where the jaguars and the panthers, and they could actually shift their fields and become a panther or a jaguar, right? And then there's ones that can turn into butterflies, and there's all these things that shamans are able to do because they must be doubling their body, although people can actually see them go from the human form into this, using, quantum physics or whatever they're using. But they could actually change their form from being a human to being a jaguar or whatever, they call it shape-shifting. And so there's a shape-shifting where they actually physically turn into that, right? Or there's the other one where they're in the astral plane, right? When they go into a trance or a deep sleep, and in the astral, their body is that of an animal. And then they go to, I don't know if it's a mirror universe or a mirror world where it looks just like the earth, but they're not in the form of a human. They're in the form of this jaguar. And so they're, seeing what the jaguar sees and feeling what the jaguar feels. And they're able to go through, say, maybe a jungle or whatever it is. And then when they come out of the trance, they're back in the human body. So I guess it's kind of more of a soul projection. And then there's the ones where you just feel like you're in the body. So you can do a deep meditation, and then you visualize that you're in the body of whatever animal it is. And then you can do that. And then when you're in that body of the animal, then you're getting a sense of what that creature's going through in that environment. And it gets you deeper into this more animal nature that we have. And then the more animal nature that you have, the easier you can communicate with non-humans. So those are some forms of animal communication. And I can't I always try to say her last name. Her first name is Anna, and she's from South Africa, and her last name begins with a B. And I think it's like a Dutch name, and I have a hard time pronouncing it or just remembering the spelling of it because I'm kind of dyslexic. But she had done a lot of sanctuaries. So she was an animal communicator, and she was, she had clients. And then eventually she started going to nonprofits, sanctuaries and, places where wild animals are. And, she'd be asked to come and help with an animal that had been traumatized. And there was one video that you can find on YouTube where she goes to a cat, like a large cat sanctuary, wild cats. And she speaks with a Black Panther who was named Diablo at the time. And then Diablo didn't like his name, and so he became Spirit. I'm going to get emotional because it's really, really emotional. But anyway, she had this conversation, and the guy who started the sanctuary he was very scientific, and he goes, I don't believe in animal communication. I don't, he was very skeptical. And then after experiencing this, he became an animal communicator. So it is real. And I know when I was in Vermont and Pennsylvania, I went to Vermont in 2022 to have an animal communication business there, and it didn't work. People were, even in Vermont, which is so rural and, nature and all these things, that people just were not into animal communicators, or they didn't have the money to pay for it. There was a lot of people, they just, oh, that's expensive. I don't want to pay for that. Or, I didn't want to do it for free because I needed to make a living. But there was one woman, though, who was doing animal communication with horses, and she was over in southern Vermont, and I never really got to know her because I emailed her, and all she ended up doing was putting me on her email, her newsletter or whatever, and I no, I want to have a talk with you, because I was trying to get into the animal communication, make a network. And the only thing I ended up making a network with was the Reiki practitioners, and there was some animal Reiki practitioners, but mostly they were working with humans, and I was trying to build a network, and it didn't happen, and I eventually came back to Washington State. But I remember just spending so much time going into pet groomers, and I tried to, I would send my business card to holistic and other types of vets, and I did not get any traction. I came back to Washington State because when I first started my business, it was in Washington State, and I had clients, and mostly my friends, and I did a lot of freebies because I was just learning how to do it. I think I did over 50 of them for free, and I was building my client base, and then eventually people started paying me for it. So I came back to Washington State because it's more open to animal communication, and it's more open to Reiki, and it's more open to a lot of these, pranic healing and a lot of those different things, where you will find those in the Northeast, but it's just not as much. And the general public, you have to work much harder to network, to educate, to inspire. And so I came back to Washington State, for that very reason. But I had this vision of me being in Vermont and going to sanctuaries, and there are people who are doing that. But they're more established and they're from that area. So to come from another part of the country and to, to make that leap into another, it's really, for those of you who don't live in the U.S., there are so many different cultures in the U.S. There isn't just the American, people think of, American as one thing. Well, there's 50 states here, and each state has its own culture, its own microculture, or even sometimes major cultures. And then you'll have, because the country's made from immigrants, and of course Native Americans as well, I got this Native American necklace on, it's different, so if you're in Oklahoma, you've got totally different culture than if you're in Hawaii or California or Washington State. And so if you don't know that culture and you can't speak, we're all speaking English, but there's just different, there's almost different English depending on which state you're in. And also the animals are different, the trees are different, the food is different. So the United States is almost 50 different countries. Minnesota is different than Pennsylvania, And, Pennsylvania is much different than Vermont, even though they're both in the Northeast and you think they'd have things in common. They do, but they're different. And so Canada, same deal, like depending on which province you're in, it's going to be different. And then you go to France. France has provinces. They're different as well. So we have to get past this thing where that everybody in a country is all the same, because they're not. And it's the same with the animal kingdoms. So being an animal communicator, there is the thing where you're talking to the spirit, and that makes the giraffe and the dog and the whale all the same if you're going straight to the spirit, because then you're speaking to the unified field, and there will be a lot of similarities. But if you're speaking to a dog about dog behavior, then you have to be able to get into that realm of the dog energy. And if you go to a zoo and the zoo wants you to talk to a giraffe, well, that's going to be a different energy than the dog. But if you're going to the more unified field, which is the more shamanism, if you're going more deeper into the spirit and the soul, then that's going to be a lot like you, right? That's going to be when you have that deep conversation with, in fact, I'm going to bring him in a little bit. Harry the Maine Coon Cat, he's actually in spirit. But I'm going to bring him in for a little conversation just to give you an example of what spiritual mediumship is with animals that have passed over. And he's on my Talk to Animals on Substack, so I'll leave a link for that. So yeah, I'm going to bring in Harry, and I'm going to give you an example of spiritual mediumship, because that's the other way you can communicate with animals, the ones that are already in spirit. And then you're just speaking soul to soul, spirit to spirit, right? And they will send movies and sensations and things as well, but it's completely different than speaking to an animal that's in the living. That's why animal communicators will go, is this animal you want me to speak to, is this animal in the living, or are they in spirit? Because it is different. Okay, so I'm going to bring in Harry. Harry is a large, very, very large Maine Coon Cat. And he is orange and white. And he's got kind of yellowish green eyes. I never met Harry when he was alive. He came to me when I was doing research on cats, because I put a class together and I had to research different breeds of cats. And I became very hooked on the Maine Coon Cat. And then I started hearing a Maine Coon Cat actually talking to me, and then he told me he was in the spirit and his name was Harry. And that's how Harry came to me. So let's bring in Harry, because I can actually feel his presence. And again, he is a large, like if you see Maine Coon Cats, they're large anyways, but this one is extra large. And he actually lived in Maine, and his main person was a woman artist, a painter, and she had a painting studio, and he would hang out in the studio. Okay, so I'm bringing him in now, and I'm going to ask him about... I'm going to ask him a good question, actually. I'm going to ask him a very esoteric question, because he likes esoteric questions. What is the future of cats and felines as we're going forward into this next age, this golden age? What is the future for cats? Okay, cats want to be included in healing. So a lot of the cats, once they get healing, they're like humans. So once they get a healing, say they have a kidney problem or something like that, and they go to an energy healer. Well, once they have enough healing, they want to become a healer. And they already have healing abilities, but they want to blend their energy with healers. So you'll meet a lot of Reiki people, and they'll have cats, and they'll say, well, my cat comes into the space to help with the healing sessions, because the cat is blending its ancient cat energy, because they were considered healers and psychics and temple cats and holy cats and sacred cats, when you go all the way back to the ancient times. And Harry's showing me Egypt. That's his favorite time in history, early ancient Egypt, when things were still uncorrupted, when there was a very good relationship between animals and insects, like bees especially, and humans. And cats were highly regarded, and there was a lot of reverence for them. They were seen as being godlike, like gods, like one of their is it Sekhmet, or I can't remember which one. Anyways, he's showing me the Egyptian gods and goddesses, and he's showing me the ones that are part cat. And he's saying that's how highly regarded, both dogs and cats were highly regarded by Egyptians. But he thinks that cats were more highly regarded because cats are more portable in a sense, or they would be in the temples, but they would also be in the homes. Some cats actually guarded homes, or they guarded temples to, keep not so much human form out, but energies. So they would protect the, like if dark entities started coming around, like in spirit form, the cats, and you can see this, he's saying, in modern cats, where they're looking, they're kind of looking around the space and they're seeing movement and you don't know what's there, but you can feel like a chill in the air, or you can feel something. And then the cat, you'll see them stalking things, but you'll think there's a mouse or something and there's nothing there. And it's actually, the cats still have this ability to detect spirits. And they can pick up frequencies, which is why when you're doing Reiki or sound healing or playing music of certain kinds, the cats will come into the space and they may start purring really loud. And then he's saying they're not just purring loud because it's the clock. They're not just purring loud because they feel contented. They're purring because purring is frequencies. I think it's kind of like the singing bowl. It's between, I think, 100 and 1,000 hertz, I believe. I mean, I may be wrong on that. He's saying between 100 and 1,000 hertz. And that is the frequency that, no, he's saying much lower than that, not 100 to 1,000. He's saying like 40, as low as like 40 hertz. And then he's showing me a range between 40 and 100. And he's saying that is the frequency of healing. And so if the cat has a sense that there is somebody doing healing work, whether it's Reiki or any other kind of healing with energy, then even toning, the cat will start purring really loud. And it's not because they're necessarily like content, because you think, oh, my cat's purring, they must be contented and sleepy or whatever it is. It's like, no, that purring is adding to whatever frequency. So if you're striking a tuning fork, and the cat starts purring really loud, that cat is adding its purring sound, which are frequencies, just like that tuning fork. So that cat is having a conversation with that tuning fork, and they're blending their energy for a healing. So they may sit in someone's lap. So you may have someone come over to your house, and they may not even like cats, but the person might have cancer and they don't know it, or they have some sort of maybe emotional imbalance or something's going on, and the cat will, like radar almost, magnetically be drawn to that human, and they will get in the lap of the human, and the human may be allergic to cats. I've had that happen, or something like that, but they'll insist on getting either sitting next to the person, or they'll get in the lap and then they'll start purring. And that is them inviting, you can always say, thank you, but no thank you. You can always, tell the cat you don't want the healing, but they are offering their healing abilities to that person. So, of course, if the person's allergic, it's going to be really tough because they're not healing the allergies. They're healing something more in the energetic field. Although maybe over time those allergies will go away. I'm not a medical practitioner. Because it may be that the allergies are caused by a fear of cats, right? Or there may be an anxiety of cats because they know they're allergic to cats, and oh no, there's cats coming over and now I'm going to have my allergies, because, you can go into that as well. But you can always communicate with the cat and say, thank you, just be as respectful as you can and say, thank you, I appreciate your love and I appreciate you wanting to do this, but I really am allergic and it's going to make me not feel better. So you can communicate. But say somebody doesn't have an allergy, but they have some emotional imbalance, maybe they're grieving, and the cat will sense it, and the cat will come over and get in the lap or sit next to the person and start purring. And that purring isn't, and they'll go to sleep, right? And you think the cat is just sleeping. The cat is actually in a trance and offering healing to that person. And what will happen in that person's life is they may go to a medical doctor after that, and the medical doctor will go, okay, let's do some tests, and then they'll find like precancerous condition, or maybe a really early growth of cancer, and or whatever it is, and they'll be able to address it. And so that cat ends up saving that person's life, right? And you hear this with dogs, and dogs do it more with their sniffing abilities, whereas cats are more psychic. And so they, again, they're natural healers. So this is what Harry's saying. Now, Harry never sat in anybody's lap because except when he was younger, because he was a huge cat, and you'd have like cat like all the way up to your eyeballs, you know, and then his tail was like super long. And he said his tail was very expressive. It was his favorite part of his body. And he's saying that's pretty true for all Maine Coon cats. They love their tails. And the other thing that he's saying Maine Coon cats do is they're very clean. So he used to get a lot of hairballs because they have long hair, and he would lick his, clean his body off. He loved being groomed. He says that Maine Coon cats love being brushed. They love being groomed, but that you have to do it at a very young age when they're kittens, because if you just go up to them when they're adults and they've never been groomed with a brush or anything, they might get upset. But you slowly get them into your human world and get them into a structured routine and that sort of thing. And then it makes them feel safe, and then they trust. And then when they feel safe and trust, that's when they can bring out their healing abilities. And it's kind of like the same for all of us, really. Because if we're doing Reiki and we're in an environment where, it's really scary, we're not going to be able to really do Reiki. I mean, we could try, but deep breathing is going to be really hard if you're in fight or flight. So, anyways, that's what he wanted to say about cats' abilities. And he's saying all cat breeds have these abilities. Now, if a cat's been traumatized, then they need to be healed first before they can foster these abilities. But that all cats have this potential. And, he's saying that some cats are very hyper defensive, and sometimes they can be with a cat healer. So you can put two cats together, and you might have to put them in separate rooms, and so that one cat can send healing energy to the other cat that's been traumatized. So they can heal other animals, and they can help heal humans. And he's saying in the future, we're going to have something called cat energy medicine, where people will go to a place, maybe like a cat cafe or something like that, except these cats will be healing cats. They won't necessarily be rescued cats. They will be cats with healing abilities, and there will be training that they will go through, because they have the natural healing abilities, but to put them with humans, they'll be trained in a certain way. And there will be cat therapies and for cats and other animals, and then there'll be cat therapies for dogs. And it will be, again, they'll just be laying in different space. They won't come up to the humans unless they need to, but they'll be like on cat trees or just on couches or whatever, and the person will come and sit in the middle of the room, and then the cats all in the periphery will send healing energy to the person, and it will be like getting a Reiki treatment. So he's saying that is the future for cats. They want to be more in the realm of healing and medicine. And there'll still be the cats who won't be part of that. There'll be the humor cats, like he's a humor cat, where, animal communicators and pet psychics or whatever, actually animal communicators will have a conversation with the cat, and they'll bring humor, right? Or they'll be in videos. They'll have like their guardian will be a video maker, right? And they'll make really funny videos with the cat, not AI, but like real cats. And then those videos will cheer people up and be healing in that way as well. Okay, so I'm going to let Harry go because he'll talk all day, and I don't have all day. And there's an airplane coming over the house. So anyways, I wanted to, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to end with a singing bowl, and then I'm going to do a little yoik. So a yoik is another way of communicating with animals. And I'm going to do American yoik because I'm obviously not a Sami person. I do have Sami ancestry, but it goes like way back, hundreds of years. So I'm going to do something called an American yoik. And a yoik is you pick an object, right? It could be, usually it's a person, place, or thing, but it can be an animal, like a bird or a squirrel or a tree. And so I'm going to do a yoik to, there's an ash tree outside this window. And so I'm going to do a yoik to that ash tree. And what I'm doing is I'm exchanging energy with it, and it comes out as a sort of vocalization. It could be throat singing. It could be, sometimes it's guttural, sometimes it's an actual, sounds like Native American singing, or it could sound like light language. And you can even combine light language and yoiks. And so I call it an American yoik because I'm really far removed from my Finnish heritage and very, very far removed from the Sami heritage. And it would be disrespectful for me to walk around calling myself a Sami when the Sami people in the Nordic countries have suffered a lot of hardship, just like Native Americans in this country, and indigenous people all over the world. So we need to be respectful to them when, even like this necklace, this is a Native American necklace, but I'm not Native American. So I have to be respectful to the culture, the indigenous culture where things come from. Because a lot of times we'll have jewelry from African indigenous people or indigenous people from maybe Australia or different places. So when we wear that jewelry or we use their stones, like the Mukite stone, which comes from the outback of Australia, and it's part of that indigenous culture, we need to show respect to those, just like we need to show respect to the earth. And the more respect we show to the earth, the more we can communicate with the earth. So we can communicate with the trees and the minerals and the animals and the birds, because we're being respectful. And Earth Day again is coming up. That's why I had these stones here. Is coming up this month, April, around, I think it's around the 20th, or I think it's the 22nd. It could be at different times, different days, depending on where the weekend falls. And it's a time to go out and pick up litter and plant trees and honor the earth and have maybe ceremonies. Originally, it was an ecological event. I think it was in the 1970s. It was starting by an American. And I think Earth Day is now worldwide. I don't know for sure, but I know it's definitely in the U.S. I don't want to be U.S.-centric and think that just because we do something here, everybody else is doing it. But I think it is worldwide. I think it's recognized worldwide. Or at least in the European countries. And so it's a time to honor the earth. And so that's why I'm going to do the yoik. But first, the singing bowl. And remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Hiltiro ni roma hilo, hiltom ro yomi hento hito maite hai no yanom be otto hey hai no be otto. Hey. Okay, so that's my American yoik. And they're improvised, and we never know what's going to come out. It's like light language. You open your mouth, it comes through. It is a form of energy exchange. It is shamanic. It comes from the Sami shamans of the past. And it's usually a cappella, but now you can find it with musical backing. And you can hear it as like regular melodies and sometimes with lyrics. But it used to be more, it went through a stage where it was vocables. And a lot of the Native American chants are actually vocables as well. And sometimes they're real words of the different dialects and languages. So with that, have a wonderful week bonding with you and your pet, and hopefully you will go and learn more about animal communication, horse whisperers, animal shamans, and all the rest of it. And another thing to look into is animal stories. So if you go to all the indigenous cultures, they'll have animal stories, whether it be like a crow story, a raven story, I think only certain times a year you can do the coyote stories from the Native Americans because it's bad luck, I guess, if you do it at other times. But there's all these different stories of all these different creatures. It could be I don't like to say folk story. It could be an animal story from Africa, or the Sami people have animal stories, usually with reindeer. Not always. Sometimes it's the fox or I think there's bear stories. Anyways, go look those up, and hope you have a wonderful week again with you and your pet bonding. and bonding with the whole unified field. Bye for now.